Welcome everyone. Today we'll have a special last Epoch 1.0 loot filter guide. Now looking behind me, I want to show you how quickly you can create a loot filter and make use of the loot filter in your game. So it takes less than 10 seconds to do this particular method, and this is one of the first ways you can be getting any loot filters for your mastery, for your classes, and also for your special build. So right away you can see I was able to implement any of the loot filter for any of the build from last Epoch builders, and this allows me to duplicate and replicate any of the build with the target loot filter. Now of course, on the second and also third part, I'll be teaching you guys how to make a universal loot filter for any class, any build, and how to adjust for your loot filters. And finally, we're looking into some of the key stats and also, affixes you can look for your loot filters. So the first part should be very simple to take you less than 10 seconds to get any loot filter for your class. Then we're going into the details of how to make your own loot filter on the second part. So coming over to the first part. Firstly, let's come over to the game, come over to settings and move over to gameplay. As you scroll over to gameplay, you can see there's a number of loot filters, or if you haven't made any loot filters, you won't have any loot filters. You can simply select to create or add a new loot filter and then go into the options of paste clipboard content. So what does this mean? Because loot filter will have commits, and usually we're following a build from last Epoch tools over here from the official forum. And let's say if you have selected any of the build, currently I'm using some of the Warlock build as examples. Let's say if you selected one of the build over here and you want to replicate the build by following some of the stats and of affixes and also idols for this particular build. You can then quickly come over and click loot filters on the top over here and just name this one maybe Warlock 4 or Warlock 5. And if you select those two for your starting with resistance and also variable affixes, you won't lose any of the key affixes. And this automatically generates a loot filter for you to be replicating any of the build you're looking at the moment. So if I'm looking at this build, this will go with all the key affixes and also the stats and also item points. But if I'm looking at a different build, I can simply make another loot filter based on the stats of the gears and also legendaries and also anything that is interested for this particular build. And if I come back over here and click paste clipboard, everything from that build is replicated onto your loot filter. And this is one of the fastest way of making a loot filter for any of the build you want to follow for the mid game, early game, or the late game to get the most out of the game very, very fast. So right away you can see we have just made another build and I'm calling this one Warlock 5. Now one of the good things about using the loot filter given to the website that is generated over here is that as we follow this, we can click the personal items and also the additional key affix items. And this allows us to get some nice items for the early game and also to get some variable items for shard. Now if you're getting to the mid game or the late game and you're no longer needing the personal items, you can click this one. And as you get to the late game, you have tons of shard, you can unclick this one and all of a sudden you're farming towards your mid game and also late game for any of the build you have selected for any of the class. And this is very important to know and saves tons of time. Now on the topic of directly importing loot filters, one thing to notice is I noticed on the website you can see my build and also a lot of other content creators build. Let's come over to Action RPG's build over here as an example. So if we come over to his video, notice that if you click on any of the build, I'm searching for Warlock at the moment, right? If you scroll down the YouTubers links over here, usually they will also provide you with a loot filter. And you can see that Action RPG is usually very nice. It provides you with a loot filter shared on the Google Doc. You can simply go out control and select everything and use the same method to implement any of the build. I'll show you guys over here. Now that I have copy pasted everything from the Google Doc and I click paste, and this will generate a loot filter made by the content creator. So the similar method works. You can either be generating a loot filter by following a build of your choice, or you can be following the content creator's build, my build or anyone else's build. If they share the loot filter, you can use this method as well. And you can see the loot filter will be slightly different to what I was copying in the previous loot filter, because this is made by the content creator. And if you're following his guide and his build, this can be very fast for you to get any of the builds. Now coming over to the second part. If you want to make a loot filter yourself and also learn how to craft a loot filter, we're going to briefly talk about over here with my universal loot filter template. Usually this consists of 5 different elements. So the first one will allow us to show all the items that is important, including set items, unique items, and also exalted items. Now this is more generalized because you might not need some of the exalted items, but you will definitely need the set and also unique items for other builds and also classes. So you can fine filter this one in the future, but this way you don't miss anything. The next red color filter over here we have is going to be focusing on idols. And here I'm currently using an example for my minions for the idols. You can see that I have selected a lot of resistance and also defense stats for idols, which can be used for any of the class. And because I was playing Acolyte, I adjusted this universal template towards minion damage and also minion fire damage for my minion fire build, which I'll teach you guys the adjustment very soon. After that, we have the green color ones. The green color ones are focused on getting the key affixes that is important to our class and also our build, and everything that is related to our particular type of build. Now this can be very universal because there will be something that is needed for every class. And this is why the universal loot filter is workable with a slight adjustment, which I'll show you guys. And finally to that, we'll be looking at rare items with any of the tier 4 affixes. And this allows us to get a ton of tier 4 affixes and make use of those affixes in the early stage of the game. For example, I was looking for experimental, I was looking for any of the resistance, armor, increased health for the early and also mid stage of the game. And finally, the last particular selection will just simply hide everything that was not selected at the top 4. So this way you don't see anything else that you don't need for any of the build. So now that we'll briefly talk about the 5 categories of loot filters, let's have a look at how to create this one yourself. So right away, you'll be using the first part anyways because we'll select everything that is needed for a universal loot filter. Second to that, we'll be labeling the idols in terms of red. So let me show you guys how to do this and I'll walk you guys through this. So here I'll be adding another rule, and here I'll be going to show recolor, we go to red, and then we're going to add a condition. We're going to add towards affixes, and here we'll be selecting all the affix that it will be interested for our particular class and also our particular build. Now in order to make this more generalized for you guys and not miss anything, let's say if I'm playing any of the build, I'll take the general idols, but there will be a lot of them, right? So here, if anything I don't need, I can take all of that. But just for generalized effect, I'll keep all of those. And second to that, if you're playing a class, you won't be needing idols for a different class. And unless you want to play a different alt, right? We'll talk about that in the future. So currently I'm playing Acolyte. So I'm going to select the idols for Acolyte. Now there's a lot of selection, which I'll teach you guys how to remove those after. So once I select those two, I'll click OK. And our first set of the idol slot color is made. So I'll take away this one. Notice that this one has 87 affixes. This one only have 19 after I narrowed it down. So I try to keep everything that is useful for you guys, for your class, and for any of the build for your class. Now, should you want to finer filter this, so what you want to do is you want to click in there, and then you want to have a look at the things that you don't need. Let's say, for example, as a Warlock, I don't need dodge, I don't need, ward gaining, I don't need stun chance. I can unclick the ones I don't need. Or vice versa, I can only click the ones I need. And this allows you to, fine filter for what you don't need. And this, then in return, will reduce the loot filter down to a minimum size. And notice that I can easily reduce the 76 here into 19 affixes by selecting the ones I need. Now at this point of building a loot filter, it is quite important for you to understand what is essential stats for your class and also for your build. Usually with any of the classes that is mage based, you want intelligence as main stats, maybe vitality, maybe crit multipliers, and over here we're going with a narcotic build. So we're going to need a narcotic damage for the Warlock and also narcotic resistance to combine with overcapping narcotic resistance. And this gets a little more tricky because you want to know what you needed. But once you know what you need, you can easily just select those that you needed. And this works for all the build. So the example I have over here is for the minion damage, and I was going for the minions for the necromancer over here. So once we have selected the idols that is needed for most of the class, so over here you can see in the screen my example of selecting idols for most of the classes that's needed. And here I purposely had shared damage fire because I was going for a fire damage build. But if you're not going for this one, you can unclick this one. And after that, because my class is Acolyte, I'll click into Acolyte. if your class is not Acolyte, if you're Mage, you can click into Mage. And then you want to click everything that is needed for your class and also for your build. This will take some time, but this will allow you to fine filter any of the stats. Now if we come over to the green filters over here, similar method is also used. Over here, I simply click recolor and select the color as a green color. And then going into the affixes, over here I'm looking for valuable affixes that I can turn into shard. So for the Acolyte, I'll be looking for the ones that helps me to build minion damage as this example. Now I know this one could be a little complicated, that's why I decided to show you guys this on the second part, where you can just import it what you need on the first part without knowing all those details. So usually we want hyper damage. After that, for the particular build for my minion summon example over here, I'll be going with a lot of minion damage, summoned levelings, and also additional damage with zombies. So once you have those key affixes selected, you can find those items, extract those affixes for your future crafting. So the red ones are idols, the green ones are extracting affixes, and finally the blue ones are the ones with some rare affixes. So this one takes a little more time to understand, but I'll briefly go through this with you guys. So firstly, I'm selecting the color of blue, and then I'm still going with affixes. Now one thing to notice that over here, I am selecting with at least one of those affixes greater or equal to 4. So I'm looking for affixes that is tier 4 or higher. And this gives me a better stats of what I'm looking for. So what I was looking for is I was looking for any of the minion damage that is related to a Warlock build, and I was looking for anything that is related to the Acolyte build over here that gives me more minion damage. And this allows me to look for early to mid-game gears as I go into the Monolith. And I'll provide you guys with this whole template for you guys to play around with. Now hopefully I didn't take too long and make it too complicated, and hopefully I tried to explain this enough. But if I didn't explain this enough, make sure you let me know in the comments about crafting on your own loot filter, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments as well. And I try to make this one as simple as I can for you guys, and then we can build forward into the game as you find more ways and also fine and filter your loot filters for the late and also end game.